All right, so today's topic is we're going to look at 2023 volunteer trends and proven strategies for 2024 recruitment. We did this webinar, I think, 4 months ago or so, but it was very popular, and so we thought we'd just bring it back again. We added a little bit of more data here as well, and so every time we have a new session, we try to do add a little bit more. Before we dive into the everything, my name is Gung. I am going to be your presenter today. I'm also the CEO and co-founder here at Civic Champs. If you've never been on one of our webinars before, and my career in the past, was largely in corporate. I had a couple other tech startups and started Civic Champs here in 2019, about 5 years ago. So super excited to be in the nonprofit sector. It's been super fulfilling for me. I think someone said it really well when I was talking to somebody earlier this week, that volunteering really is food for the soul, right? And really helps people individually, even as they're giving. It's good for them as well. And so I thought that was a really nice way to phrase that. And so today our topic is, or the sort of the agenda, right, is we're going to look at the state of volunteering and look at some stats and some trends. We're going to dig into some specific insights that some of our partners and friends from Volunteer Match and Benevity have put together. And then we're going to share some of our own internal insights, proprietary from all the data that we have from, the hundreds of nonprofits that we serve. And then we'll look at some best practices and food for thought as you're, looking at the rest of 2024 and, how might you leverage National Volunteering Week and Month to really grow your volunteer program, right? All right, and so with that, the first thing I'd love to do is do a little bit of a poll here. And so we're going to ask you all some questions. And so if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to answer that, that'd be fantastic. So let me see if I have the ability to do that. All right, so oops. All right, polls. It's the Great. Yeah, and this is just a way for us to get a sense of who's all in the room a little bit. I mean, we had from the chat, that was awesome to get a little bit of details. But here, if you don't mind answering, just to see, what kind of size of nonprofits do we have? And then your own experiences around, have you been growing since COVID? Are you bigger than you were last year versus 2022? And certainly feel free, for that third question to think about 2023. Or 2024, right? This first quarter, like, is that bigger than your Q1 of 23, right? So we'll give folks a second to answer. We got 56% participation. We're up to 64. Let's see if we get to at least 80%, and then we'll sort of close it off and share the results. 72, 76. Oh, yeah. All right, here we go. We got to 80. Oh, 84. All right, maybe I'll do a quick 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we'll end the poll. Fantastic. And so let me share the results and we can look at this together. And so it looks like, we have a pretty wide range of the size of nonprofits here today. So from 0 to 10, to all the way to 1,000 plus, right? So equal number of folks that have just a handful of volunteers versus more than 1,000 volunteers. And then in terms of folks that said, hey, do we have more or less versus 2019? It looks like it's a slight majority have less than they had pre-pandemic, but 68% of you all said you have definitely grown year over year from 2023 to 2022, right? So we're going to keep these stats in mind as we go through the data, just so you can also think about how might your organization benchmark, not against just folks that are here today, but more broadly as well. Right, so I'll stop sharing. All right, so Just a level set for everyone. So every year, we have roughly 400 or almost $500 billion in donations here in the U.S. And we're seeing, between 74 to 78 million adults volunteering. That number is what we had. 77 was what we had in 2021. And actually, our internal data and estimates show that we are at that level, or if not higher, at this point. Sort of, I think some. All right. And so, yeah, so we have, so how do we get to this data, right? And so a couple data sets that you can actually quickly, very easily get to. One is if you look at just Google search results, right? If you look at the phrase, volunteering opportunities near me, this is the trend of that Google search over time, right? And so we're here in April 2019, right? This is what it looks like here on the far left. Sort of goes down and sort of a little seasonal. And then obviously with COVID, right, you can really see the impact here, right? So you have this like dramatic decline, right? Just to some degree here. And then it's really picked up, right? And so since 2022, you could see that there's this sort of steady increase over time. And today, right, if you look at the far right, and you just draw that line all the way across, right? Like it's actually higher than we were at the same time in 2019, right? Which is super exciting. So there's a lot of interest in volunteerism today. And we just pulled this data yesterday, right? Similarly, if we look at some other data sets, right? So if we look at from our friends in Volunteer Match, so they did a survey and they said, this is probably not surprising, but volunteerism generally increases with age, right? And so the number, of hours that you volunteer as you get older is significantly higher, which is probably why many of us, right, have, our core volunteer group is kind of our retirees, right, that come every week. And then similarly, right, there, from COVID, right, one of the things that we did learn is that there's a great increase in awareness about informal volunteering, right? And so I think this is helpful to think about people not only just being aware of this, but also maybe like now that they're aware, some people might have a preference for more casual or sort of informal volunteering. And even though your organization is technically considered formal volunteering, are there opportunities for you to learn from that and maybe leverage opportunities to provide more casual volunteering opportunities for the folks that are kind of looking for that kind of experience? But more importantly, from our friends at Volunteer Match is they shared some data around the number of connections that they have on Volunteer Match. So if you're not familiar with Volunteer Match, what they do is they have nonprofits can post opportunities to say, hey, I'm willing to take in volunteers and here's some things that you can do. And then volunteers go to the site and they sort of get matched, right? And they search and look for things that they're interested in. And so Volunteer Match tracks how many times they made that connection, right? And someone says, click on the like email this nonprofit or call this nonprofit, right? And so you'll see in 2020, right? That number was 607,000. 2021 sort of came back a little bit. 22 was sort of a bit of a low point here, and then it has really rebounded here in 2023. So they saw a 23% increase year over year from 2022 to 2023 as just things really got back to normal, right? And people are now getting back into flow with things. All right. And then the other folks that we looked at is Benevity, who have, they have a state of corporate volunteering report they put out. And so this is around corporate volunteering, but I think it gives us a signal again of sort of trends that are in the space. And we'll actually have a dedicated webinar with our friends at Benevity coming up here in a little bit as well. And so what they found though on corporate volunteering hours is that, again, you see from 2019 to 2020 on their platform, this kind of decrease. And then, on the corporate side, it's really skyrocketed, right? Now, some of this is probably reflective a little bit of Benevity's own growth, but they're seeing right internally that there's a lot more volunteer hours that they're tracking with their system from 2021 to 22 to 23, right? So 22.2 million hours go through the Benevity platform today, right? And similarly, the number of active corporate volunteers has really increased as well, right? And so many of you, that might be a whole question we ask as well at some point is, how many folks have seen an increase in corporate volunteering, right? So people that are reaching out to say, hey, we'd like to come out as a corporate group again and support you all. What dates are available, right? Like I'm guessing many of you probably are feeling that as well. Getting some inquiries from folks that are looking for to do things on the corporate side. Right? And then here, when we look at the the global average in volunteering participation that they saw on the corporate side, right? That also has really increased, right? So it's roughly 9% of corporate employees now participate in corporate volunteerism in some way or form, which is really exciting. And so as you're thinking about, growing or recruiting volunteers, I think companies can be a great place to go, and as these trends show that they're more and more interested in participating with nonprofits. There's a lot of interest in their employees to do so, and so that could be a really nice avenue for nonprofits. All right. Now, let's take a look at some of our own internal data here from Civic Champs. So these are our stats from 2023 from nonprofits that use Civic Champs. And what we did is basically we said, hey, let's just take a look at some averages first to just a benchmark, right? And so on average, this is probably about the average of what we saw earlier from our poll. We have folks, on average have 262 active volunteers, right, on Civic Champs. This might be a little higher than average. It's usually when people use software, they're probably a little bit more dedicated to, right, and they're investing a bit more into their programs as well. There's roughly 6,000, let's call it 700 hours of volunteering per organization at that, within Civic Champs as well. And then the estimated impact, right, and we're just using the national average here that the independent sector and the Corporation for National Community Service puts out of $31.80. And so if you take those hours and multiply it by the 31.80, you get $212,000 of impact that their volunteer programs are creating, which is, it's a significant amount of money and impact, right? And then on average, these organizations saw, roughly 1,500 acts of service, right? Activities or one-time instances of volunteering from their volunteers. And then if you break that down, it's almost 6 shifts or 6 activities per year per volunteer, right? Is what you're saying. So on average, people are coming back 6 times. That's probably skewed quite heavily. If we were to dig in, I'm pretty sure this is one of those 80-20 things where you get a number of one-time volunteers and you have your regulars that are doing not just 6, but really you're looking at 40 times or maybe even 80 times a year that they're coming in. And then the average hours per shift is 4.4, right? So 4.5 hours is the sort of average duration for volunteer shifts in our system, right? And the average per volunteer is 25 hours per volunteer, right? Again, I'm sure this is skewed quite a bit by those heavy volunteers that come every week. And so in summary, right, this is what that looks like. And then just, keeping that in mind, right, we thought, how did this look, compared to 2022, right? And so here the numbers are going to be a little bit different. And so what we had to do is we had to remove all the organizations that, we didn't have over the full 2-year duration. So this is nonprofits using Civic Champs in, for the full year in 2022 and the full year in 2023. So a little bit smaller data set here. But what we saw was that basically the average number of volunteers was about the same, but a little bit higher, right? 1% growth here on average, 6% growth in the number of hours that they volunteered. That matches the same impact. So about an $8,500 growth in impact per organization. And then really we saw a lot more activity per organization, right? So the number of times people came to volunteer actually grew 8%, which is pretty substantial. And then so the other thing is, the activities per volunteer kind of ticked up, right? So, as an individual volunteer, you're more likely to come back more often. Your number of hours grew about 5% as well. Roughly 1 hour per year, right? Higher than the previous year, and kind of flat in terms of hours per activity, right? So it's the total number of hours is still roughly the same. All right. And so it's, we'll again share these slides, but it might be helpful just as you're benchmarking your own organization, right? How do you compare to some of these trends, right? If you were to calculate activities per volunteer, hours per volunteer, right? What does that look like for you? And if you're either higher or lower, thinking about, especially if you're lower, right? Like, how, what is it that other organizations are doing to sort of like bolster those numbers? Okay. All right, and the last thing that we did here was a little bit of a flip from today, but we did the kind of the same survey question that you all answered, but with a much larger group of folks. And what we found was that roughly, 55% or the majority of folks that they actually had more volunteers today versus 2019. And that's pretty consistent with all the other data that we saw today, right? So whether that's trends or volunteer match or, the Benevity data, right? All of that indicates that, we're actually higher than pre-pandemic levels today. And certainly, 83% of folks said they were higher in 23 versus 22, right? So that one, that trend is very, very, very obvious, right? And I think, well, one thing let me pause on that for one more moment. And the reason I think this is actually kind of interesting in my book is because uh, the census is pretty outdated in 2021. And that conclusion was like, oh, volunteerism is falling off a cliff. It's so much lower than it used to be. And that's, I've heard that from some other folks that I've talked to, because that's really the only big data set that we've had for a while. And so I think it's helpful for us to, have accurate data and to know where we're sitting today, right? And so if it's not true that volunteerism has really fallen off a cliff and it's actually, higher than ever, right? That changes how you might approach things. And so I think it's important for us just, and that's why we do this webinar and just to make sure that everyone is sitting, with the right set of data, right? Okay, all right. So we'll dive in here with a little bit of best practices. What I would encourage, if you have questions around whether that's, some reflections on the data that you just saw, or as we go over best practices, if you have questions, just put that in chat. I'll try to keep an eye out on it as well, but Chloe, who's on my team as well, is gonna capture anything that I don't get to, and then we'll circle back to that at the end of the webinar. All right, so 5 best practices that we found and we'll want to share today is the first. We talked a little bit about this already, but providing increased flexibility for your volunteers and your volunteer program. The second is reimagining how you do volunteer recruitment. The third is creating memories for your volunteers so that they're more emotionally attached to your organization, capturing those moments and memories. And then the last is, of course, as a technology firm, right, leveraging technology and how you could do that. And so I'm providing increased flexibility. And so there's kind of 3 ways you could do it. So one is for those of you that were, volunteer managers during COVID, you might remember, a lot of folks are trying to create at-home opportunities. And I think there's still an opportunity to continue to allow that, right? So leveraging technology to allow folks to support you while they're still at home. And this, from an equity standpoint, I think is important too, because it allows folks that otherwise couldn't engage with you to be able to do so, right? And feel like they're part of the community. And it has all sorts of benefits in that aspect as well. The second is thinking about where volunteers can help, right? I really like the thought that if you think about every nonprofit, right, all of us were created out of volunteers, right? That's like every nonprofit was fully volunteer led and run at the beginning, right? And so that meant that the volunteers did everything from fundraising to organizing to marketing to, right? It's like it's a fully volunteer led organization. And as organizations have grown larger and professionalized, we've pigeonholed in many cases, what our volunteers can do, right? And so, oh, well, our volunteers, this is the program we have for volunteering. And so my challenge, right, for folks is to really think about like, hey, can we broaden that again? If we are, we have a more structured and sort of narrower aim for our volunteers, but in the past, right, they help with everything. And so is there opportunity for you to engage a broader set of audiences and volunteers yeah, again, right? And in that same way, it's going back to maybe the founding days of the organization. And the last one here around micro volunteering, and these are just activities that are that require less time for folks to do, and might be a good way to again engage folks that might be more constrained on time in terms of volunteering with you and being part of your community, right? And so I guess one example of that might be if you have like deliveries, if you have petitions that someone could sign, right? Like, or like a something simple that people could do that still supports you and gets just continues to build awareness and connection for your organization. All right, reimagining volunteer recruitment. And so we have, sometimes we'll do like a dedicated webinar on just this topic because it can go pretty in depth. And so I'll sort of do a high level today. And if you're interested, certainly happy to, share the recording of prior, webinars that we've sort of dug more deeply in this. But this idea is really around two things, right? One is understanding your ideal customer profile, right? Like who is your ideal volunteer, right? And what are the attributes of that volunteer? If you were to imagine them as a person, what do they look like? What are they, why are they motivated to join your organization? And then sort of building that profile, right? And that's helpful because once you have a good sense of who you're targeting, you can change and update your messaging to be very specific to that person, right? A good example or an interesting example, and you can find this online, is if you think about like PETA, right, or the some other animal rescue groups, right? They have very different tactics on how they engage their volunteers or their audience, right? And some are very much into their messaging, and their target audience are folks that are maybe like a little bit more upset, right? That like really motivated to act because they they're motivated by like justice and like the sense of like unfairness, right? That's that being perpetrated in terms of animal cruelty. And so you can target and change your messaging, your imagery to fit that ideal customer profile, right? Or this ideal volunteer profile. Whereas other folks, right, might be really into like, well, like I'm a pet owner. I really love my pets, and like I really like the fluffy, happy imagery, right? And the reason I volunteer is because I enjoy being with the animals, and then that's like a very different person. Um, and the messaging can be very different, right, as well. And so understanding who your ideal customer profile or volunteer profile is allows you to be more targeted, and your messaging will be more effective as a result as well, right? And then the second part of that is we have this model that we use called language market fit. And so we'll dive into more details there as well. So, but in terms of personas or the ideal volunteer profile, we'll share a bit of a template here for you, just so you can work on that on your own. But you can think about how do I how do I identify who my ideal person is and connect with them. So the first step is just thinking about your best volunteers, like your favorite volunteers, the ones that you really love, the ones that do the most amount of work, right? Easiest to work with, et cetera, et cetera. Write those people down, right? Their names and, on this sheet of paper. And then you start to analyze, right? Those volunteers, right? Just thinking about like what makes them ideal. Like what is it that you like about them, et cetera. So what are, and then so you start to list this notable attributes of those volunteers, right? Similarly, you might talk to them or at least think about like, what are the things that your volunteers in this group might feel are challenges, right? In terms of volunteering with you all, what are some of the things, or maybe even what are the challenges that they're solving by volunteering with you, right? And then you can segment your volunteers, right? And so thinking about more broadly, right? How many of your volunteers fall into this bucket? And maybe is there another persona that you actually have it could be that there's actually two really great groups of volunteers, right? And so, and they with slightly different attributes. And so you can actually create, a second persona as well, right? And so that's how you would create your initial personas. I would say it's better to just do the exercise and not worry about like, oh, did I get it perfectly right? Versus, worrying about like, oh, well, this is going to take a lot of time, right? Oftentimes, just getting that baby step is super important, right? Just getting started. And then, yeah, Chloe has shared in chat the volunteer persona template from Canva. And so take a look and you can sort of utilize that on your own time. And so finally, the second thing we talked about is finding language market fit. And so this is if you're going to talk to your volunteers to learn about them, this could be a great framework to use. And so as you're talking to your volunteers, the idea here is to really uncover, what are their goals? What are things they struggle with? And, asking them questions like, why do you volunteer with us? What was the process for how you found out about us? How did you sign up? How did that feel? Right? What convinced you to finally, sign up and join? And the key there is as you're listening, right? Don't just take away the sort of like the overall insights, right? But really listen to the very specific words and language that people are using, right? Because when we talk about our nonprofits, it's often very different than how someone in the public might talk about your nonprofit. The words that they use, how they describe it. In many ways, it's less important, how we talk about it when we're recruiting, but really like how did they describe it? What language did they use? And then if you can play back to them the exact same language, it's actually much more effective, right? In terms of connecting with them and motivating them to actually join your cause. And so that's what you're looking to do here is like identifying the very specific language and terms that they use as they're talking about like, oh, well, here's why I, essentially signed up and joined to support this nonprofit. And then the second thing you can do then is taking that language, taking those words that you're now hearing, and now you're going to draft a couple headlines, right, around like why you might want to volunteer with your organization, right? So like if you're recruiting someone, like what is that tagline or what is that headline that you would share with them on like why they should join you, right? And then you would ask somebody, the example is the 5-year-old, right? But ask them with those headlines, do they understand what you're trying to say, right? Just comprehension, right? Like, oh, do you understand like what I'm trying to, why would you join, and see if they can play it back to you, right? And then the last step here is totally optional. But every nonprofit has, I think, $10,000 in Google, free Google ads that you can apply for. And so you can actually quantitatively test what messaging is working, right, by using Google ads and targeting, potential volunteers and seeing, which of your, quote unquote ads got more clicks, driving more clicks to you. Right? And then you'll see, oh, okay, well, this one seems to be performing better. Maybe if I tweak the language a little more, does it seem like it's even more effective? Right? So that's language market fit there. And so the third tip that we have today is really around, seeing if there's ways to create memories or stories around your volunteering opportunity. Everyone likes to feel emotionally connected to your cause, right? And so this is a way for you to facilitate more of that, right? And so as an example, I have this tomato soup can. So the example I usually use is, if you're doing a food drive, right? Instead of making the thought around, clearing out your pantry, and that's really, the food drive, and that's what I'm associating it as a volunteer. That concept of just like, oh yeah, I'm doing good to the community, but I also get to kind of clear out my pantry, right? Instead, you might ask them to bring their favorite food item, right, as a kid or whatever, something that has a story tied to it. And if you're able to share that, bring it all into a room together and share that, share those stories individually, that's probably ideal. If people are just dropping off, maybe they put a little sticky on an item and say like, hey, this, and why is this like your one favorite item, right? And maybe it's because like you had it as a kid, maybe it's your grandparents used to use this specific brand and it really reminds you of them. But that's great, right? Like those are little snippets. It's pretty easy to do. And now that volunteer has this emotional connection to your organization that you've created for them, right? And so instead of just clearing out the pantry, it's like, oh, I'm sharing my favorite things to my favorite memories, and hopefully that whoever receives this item can create memories of their own that are, similar to the ones that I had, right? And so it's much more, and it just makes it a little bit more meaningful, right? All right, and so the next step there, right, is if you are creating these moments and memories, right, is, are there ways to capture them, right, and maybe utilize them for your social media or other recruiting pieces, right? And so this might be easy. You could have a volunteer walk around with their phone and capture videos and photos. That could be a different volunteer opportunity, right? Like a photographer, right? Or a videographer. Certainly you can have group photos, right, that you're capturing as well. And the other thing you could do if you're doing video is this last point, which is leverage the interviews or these little snippets to speak to objections as well. So if you're asking a volunteer like, hey, why are you here today? What motivated you? You could also reframe it a little bit and say, well, sometimes folks are concerned that they don't have enough time to get to volunteer. Do you find that to be true? Why or why not, right? And they'll be like, oh no, I actually think it was really, it was volunteering here is, it's on my way to work. It's super easy. I could drop in and drop out, or whatever it is that is an often used as an objection for someone not to volunteer with you. You can actually leverage some of this content and tailor the questions you're asking to have them sort of preempt those objections, right? And so you can post that, and as someone maybe scrolls and sees it on social media, it'll speak to them, be like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's true. Like that's great to hear that someone, that's not a real issue, right? And maybe I will volunteer now, right? And so on the right are also a couple tools. we won't dig into these, but Memory Fox, they collect videos from your volunteers to create like a video library that you can use. And then Kudo Board is one of my favorite tools, relatively inexpensive, but it's like a group thank you that you can create, or it's also a way that you can collect input, right, or memories or commentary from your volunteers and put it all onto like one big board, right? And so those are kind of neat tools. I think Kudo Board also has like a live event feature where they'll share what people have sent in already in advance, whether that's pictures or words, but then allow folks to maybe use a QR code to add their own content live, right? So you can imagine a gala, you have a projection, it's scrolling through everyone's comments, and then someone who didn't get to contribute says, oh, wait, actually, let me put something in here. Maybe I'll add a picture live. And then they see their slide essentially come up. It's a kind of a very powerful way to make them feel like they're engaged and involved, right? And then leveraging technology, right? And so as you're thinking about furthering your recruitment of volunteers, right? There's lots of great tools out there. These are some that from a project management standpoint, I've used in the past and I've enjoyed. And so Monday.com is one. There's Notion. That's what our Civic Champs team uses today. We use this for everything from recording bug tickets to planning out what features we're going to be making to maybe what's our next retreat event, etc. Right. And then Trello is kind of like a to-do board that you can have across the team. And so it's just another kind of project management tool that you can use. Of course, I would be remiss not to say you can also use Civic Champs to help with volunteer management, right? And so you're looking at our mobile app here, but we do a number of things, from managing your onboarding and application process, tracking waivers, to getting people scheduled and checking in, sort of that full life cycle, if you will, of volunteer experience. But this is the mobile app. You can see it's what it's showing you is how easy it is to check in as a volunteer, right? So they hit the blue check-in button. It'll show what events are around them. They pick the right event, and it kind of starts a little timer after that that'll run as they're volunteering. It'll auto check people out for the day, or if they remember to check out, then they're also able to leave a reflection as well, right? And note, if they're happy or not, right? And then, on the back end, of course, right, you can see all of those activities, all that feedback, why, if someone is happy or not, what comments that they might have left, right? Super fun time. I really enjoyed volunteering for you. And this way it gives you a chance to really retain those volunteers, right? You can see if someone's happy, right? Maybe engage them to have them come back with friends or recruit other folks for you. If they're less happy, you might want to reach out and just like understand why, what you could have done better, right? And then you can of course filter and find data as you need to as well on something like Civic Champs, right? And so wrapping up here, we got a little bit of time for Q&A as well, but learning takeaways. Hopefully this was helpful in terms of getting some of those stats around volunteerism and the trends in 2023. Net takeaway is volunteerism is back. Yeah, we're here. And then hopefully some of the tips were helpful, at least as a food for thought and or a thought starter for as you're thinking about the rest of 2024. And then if you want to stay in touch, right, here's my contact information, my email, my phone, my website, not my website, the Civic Chance website. And then LinkedIn, if you want to connect with me, that's my LinkedIn as well. And you can always click in it'll be hyperlinked. I think Chloe's also sharing some of that as well. So you can see that in the chats here. And then finally, we have some freebies for you all today for staying with us the whole time. We'll share this after the fact, but basically you'll get the volunteer persona template, the language market fit template, And then we have a couple blogs we'll share as well here, in terms of recruitment or that we've sort of put together over time. Right. And then finally, we have a pretty awesome webinar coming up here on the 25th, which actually has Memory Fox, who I just mentioned, but ourselves and 8 total tech for good platforms. These have all been vetted by if those of you who might know Jay Love, who is the founder of Bloomerang and the founder of eTapestry. He is an advisor or board member for all of these companies, including ourselves. He's also an investor in all of these companies. So, these are the sort of the tech companies that he thinks are most exciting in the space, and he's backed it up not only with his comments, but also really with his wallet, if you will. But yeah, we're gonna have everyone sort of share just like a quick 3 to 4 minute demo. And so if you join, you'll be able to see sort of a bunch of different cool technology and see if they're a good fit for your organization. And then finally, we're going to have a feedback form here. This is the first time we tried it, and so hopefully it works well. But really, we just want to understand, we put on all these webinars, but we want to know which ones are the ones that people really resonate with, enjoy. And so we'd love to hear your feedback, whether this is a good webinar, if there's anything that we can do to improve, right? And we'll sort of continue to ask for your feedback every week, and so that we can get better and better. And so finally, there is the, yeah, and so I'm looking through for chats. So Laura had a question. Applying and managing Google Ads, yet it keeps coming as suggested through other sources. Yes. I think, Laura, I think you're not, I think you're right, which is, it's, I think the process and it's less the applying. I think the applying is not particularly difficult. You just follow the instructions and you can apply. I think the managing piece is can be difficult, right? It is a true skill set to run effective ads. Part of it, what I've heard is, if you don't spend that much, then Google sort of ticks down the amount that that you get as an organization. My thought, maybe, I don't know if this would be helpful. We can certainly run a webinar that talks about Google Ads and how to, get started, how you might run one. One of my former companies was a digital agency, and so we manage not social media accounts, but also Google ad accounts for a number of folks. And so happy to do a session like that if that would be helpful. Yeah, I think that this is why you see a lot of consultants in the space around managing your Google ads, right? And you sort of pay them, they'll manage the spend for you. And so yeah, so that's probably why I said that was an optional final piece in terms of testing, right? Is optional using Google Ads. I would say though, one of the really interesting things is that it is free, right? For you once you apply and you get the credits and you can apply and use it. And so if you're not using it, it's sort of wasted in many ways because you're not taking advantage of those credits. So that would be the only thing I sort of push and for folks to think about. Obviously not, even free is not necessarily free in that it does take your time and mind share. And so of the different projects you have to do, of course, you'll need to evaluate whether that's one that you want your team to take on, right? All right. Google Ad Grants as mentioned often. Interested? Yeah. All right. Yeah, we'll look into that. We'll see if we can round up a couple experts for you all from our network and see if they'll put together a presentation. Yeah, that's a great idea. So, all right. Any other questions from folks? Otherwise, happy to give back folks a little bit of time today as well. Hopefully this is helpful. We took a couple weeks off here, but we'll have sort of the cadence of webinars back to sort of the weekly again here coming soon. So yes. Oh, sorry, Hillary. Yeah, please be safe. We're gonna share all the slides and the recording and all of that for you. So yes, you'll get everything. But yeah, please go find shelter. So, all right. Well, thanks everyone. Happy Thursday. Happy National Volunteering Month and happy National Volunteering Week as it's coming up. So, all right. Take care, everyone.